Silence in the court, and the king put on his spectacles and looked anxiously round to make out who was talking. Alice could see, as well over their shoulders, that all the jurors were writing down stupid things on their slates, and make out that one of them didn't know how to spell stupid, and that he had asked a neighbor to tell him. A nice muddle their slates will be in before over, thought Alice. One of the jurors had a pencil that squeaked. This, of course, Alice could not stand, and she went round to the court and got behind him, and very soon found an opportunity of taking it away. She did it so quickly that the poor little juror, it was Bill, could not make out at all what had become of it. So, after hunting all about for it, to write with one finger for the rest of the day, and this was of very little use as it left me. "Herald, read the accusation," said the king. Rabbit blew three blasts on the trumpet, and then parchment scroll, and read it as follows: "The Queen of Hearts some tarts, all on a summer's day. The knave of hearts he told us, and took them quite away." "Consider your verdict," the king said. "Not yet, not yet," the rabbit hastily interrupted. "There's a great deal to come before that. First witness," said the king, and the white rabbit blew three blasts on the trumpet. "And witness!" The first witness was the hatter. He came in with a teacup and one piece of bread and butter in the other. "I beg your pardon, Majesty," he began, "for bringing these in, but I had tea when I was sent for." "You ought to have finished," said the king. "When did—" The hatter looked at the March Hare, who had followed him into the court, arm in arm with the Dormouse. "14th of March, I think it was." "15th," said the March Hare. "16th, Mouse." "Write that down," the king said to the jury, and the jury eagerly wrote dates on their slates, and then added them up and reduced the answer to shillings and pence. "Your hat," the king said to the hatter. "It isn't mine," said the hatter. The king exclaimed, turning to the jury, who instantly made a memorandum. "I keep them to sell," the hatter added as an explanation. "I'm not a hatter." Here the queen put on her spectacles and began staring hard at the tail and fidgeted. "Give your evidence," said the king, "and don't be nervous or on the spot." This did not seem to encourage the witness at all. He kept shifting, looking uneasily at the queen, and in his confusion he bit a piece out of his teacup instead of the bread and butter. Just at that moment Alice had a sensation which puzzled her a good deal until she made out what it was. It grew larger again, and she thought at first she would get up and leave the court, but on second thought remain where she was as long as there was room for her. "You wouldn't squeeze so," said the Dormouse, who was sitting next to her. "I can't help it," said Alice very meekly. "I'm growing." "You've not right," said the Dormouse. "Don't talk nonsense," said Alice more boldly. "You know you." "Yes, but I grow at a reasonable pace," said the Dormouse, not in that region, and he got up very sulkily and crossed over to the other side of the court. Although the queen had never left off staring at the hatter, and just as through the court she said to one of the officials at the court, "Bring me the list of the singers in the last," on which the wretched hatter trembled so that he took both his shoes off. "Give your evidence," the king repeated angrily, "or disputed whether you're nervous or not." "I'm a poor man, your Majesty," the hatter began a voice, "and I hadn't but just begun my tea, not above a week or so, and what with the getting so thin and the twinkling of the teeth—" "The twinkling of what?" said the king. "And with the tea," the hatter replied. "Of course twinkling begins with a T," said the king. "Do you take me for a dunce? Go on." "I'm a poor man," the hatter went on, "and most of that, only the March Hare said—" "I didn't," the March Hare interrupted in a great— "You did," said the hatter. "I deny it," said the March Hare. "He denies it," said the king. "That part." "Well, at any rate, the Dormouse said," the hatter went on, looking to see if he would deny it too, but the Dormouse denied nothing, being fast asleep. "For that," continued the hatter, "I cut some more bread and butter." "But what did the Dormouse say?" said. "But I can't remember," said the hatter. "You must remember," remarked the king, "or execute it." The miserable hatter dropped his teacup and bread and butter, and went down on— "I'm a poor man, your Majesty," he began. "You're a very poor speaker," said the king. Here one of the guinea pigs cheered, and was immediately suppressed by the officers of the court. For hard work, I will explain to you how it was done. A large canvas bag, which tied up at the mouth with strings. Into this they slipped the guineas and then sat upon it. I'm glad I've seen that done. I've so often read in the newspapers at the end of trials there was some attempt at applause suppressed by the officers of the court, and I never understood what it meant till now. If that's all you know about it, you may stand down, continued the king. I can't, said the hatter. I'm on the floor as it is. Then you may sit down. Here the other guinea pig cheered and was suppressed. Come, that finishes the case. Now we shall get on better. I'd rather finish my tea, said the hatter. Look at the queen, who was reading the list of singers. You may go, said the king. He left the court without even waiting to put his shoes on. Just take his head off out, he added to one of the officers, but the hatter was out of sight before the officer could get him. Call the next witness, said the king. The next witness was the duchess's cook, the pepper box in her hand, and Alice guessed who it was. Even before she got into the people near the door began sneezing all at once. Yes, said the king. Shan't, said the cook. The king looked anxiously at the white rat. Low voice. Your Majesty must cross-examine this witness. Well, if I might, the king said with a melancholy air, and after folding his arms and fretting his eyes were nearly out of sight, he said in a deep voice, What are tarts made of? Said the cook. Treacle, said a sleepy voice behind her. Call her that, the queen shrieked out. Behead that dormouse. Turn that dormouse out of court. Search him. Off with his whiskers. For some minutes the whole court was in confusion. The dormouse turned out, and by the time they had settled down again, the cook had disappeared. Fine, said the king with an air of great relief. Call your next witness. He added in an undertone to the queen, Really, my dear, you must cross-examine the next witness. Quite makes my forehead ache. Alice watched the white rabbit as he fumbled over the very curious to see what the next witness would be like. Much evidence yet, she said to herself. Imagine her surprise when the rabbit read out at the top of his shrill little voice the name Alice. Chapter 12. Alice's Evidence. Here, forgetting in the flurry of the moment how large she had grown in the last few minutes, and she jumped up in such a hurry that she tipped over the edge of her skirt, upsetting all the jurymen into the heads of the crowds below. They lay sprawling about, reminding her very much of the globe of goldfish she had upset the week before. Oh, I beg your pardon, she exclaimed in a tone of great disgust, picking them up again as quickly as she could, for the accident the goldfish kept running in her head. She had a vague sort of idea that they must be collected at once and put back into the jury box, or they would die. The trial cannot proceed, said the king in a very grave voice, until are back in their proper places. Oh, he repeated with great emphasis, looking hard at so. Alice looked at the jury box and saw that in her haste she had put the lizard in head downward, and the poor little thing was weaving its tail about in a melancholy, quite being unable to move. She soon got it out again. Not that it signifies much, she said to herself. It would be quite as much use in the trial one way up as the other. As soon as they had a little recovered from the shock of being upset, and their slates and pens handed back to them, they set to work very diligently to write out a history of the accident, except the lizard, who seemed too much overcome to do anything but sit with his mouth gazing up into the roof of the court. What do you know about this business? The king said to Alice. Nothing, said Alice. Nothing whatever? Persisted the king. Nothing whatever, said very important, the king said, turning to the jury. They were just beginning to write this down. White Rabbit interrupted. Unimportant, your Majesty means, of course, he said in a very respectful tone, but frowning and making faces at him as unimportant. Of course I meant, the king hastily said, and went on to himself in an undertone. Important, unimportant, unimportant. as if he were trying which word sounded best. Some of the jury wrote it down unimportant. Alice could see this, as she was near enough to look over their slates. But it doesn't matter a bit, she thought to herself. At this moment, the king, who had been busily writing in his notebook, called out, "Silence!" and read out from his book, 42, "All persons more than a mile high to leave the court," said Alice. "I'm not a mile high," said Alice. "Nearly 2 miles high," added the queen. "You are," said the king. "Well, I shan't go at any rate," said Alice. "Besides, there's not a regular. You invented it just now." "It's the oldest rule in the book," said the king. "Rule number 1, said Alice. The king turned pale, his notebook hastily. "Consider your verdict," he said to the jury in a low voice. "There's more evidence to come yet, please, your majesty," said the White Rabbit. "Jump, hurry. This paper has just been picked up." "What is it?" said the queen. "I haven't," said the White Rabbit, "but it seems to be a letter written by a prisoner to me." "It must have been that," said the king, "unless it was written to nobody, which isn't you." "Whom is it directed to?" said one of the jurymen. "It isn't directed," the White Rabbit. "In fact, there's nothing written on the outside." He spoke and added, "It isn't a letter at all, it's a set of verses." "Are they in?" said another of the jurymen. "No, they're not," said the White Rabbit. "And the queerest thing about it," the jury all looked puzzled. "He must have the Elsa's hands," said the king. "That only makes the matter worse. You must have mischief, or else you'd have signed your name like an honest man." A general clapping of hands at this. It was the first really clever thing the king had. "That proves his guilt," said the queen. "It proves nothing of the sort. Why, you don't even know what they're about." "Read them," said the king. The White Rabbit. "Where shall I begin, please, your majesty?" he said. "Begin at the beginning, and go on till you come to the end. Then stop." As the White Rabbit read, "They told me you had been to her and mentioned him. She gave me a good character, but said I could not swim. She said I had not gone. We know it to be true. If she should push the matter, what would become of you? I gave her 1, they gave me 2. You gave 3 or more. They all returned from him to you, though they were mine before. Or she should chance to be involved in this affair, he trusts you to sit them exactly as we were. My notion was that you had been at this fit, an obstacle that came between him and ourselves, and it. Let him know you liked him best, for this must ever be a secret kept between yourself and me." "That's the most important piece of evidence we've yet," said the king, rubbing his hands. "So now let the jury, if any, explain